It happened, as the surgeon had anticipated, that in less than 3 days Commodus died of his wounds, while mine, on the contrary, wore the appearance of convalescence. The young widow, whom no earthly considerations could detach from the care of transporting her late husband's remains to Coria, that they might be deposited with due honors in the family vault, left Villarejo on her return, after inquiring, merely as a matter of course, how I was going on. As soon as I was well enough to be removed, I bent my course to Coria, where my recovery was soon ascertained. My aunt, Donna Eleonora, and Don George de Galisteo, were determined that my marriage with Helena should take place forthwith, lest some new caprice of fortune should part us once more. The ceremony was privately performed, on account of the late melancholy event, and within a few days I returned to Madrid with Donna Helena. As my leave of absence had expired, I was afraid lest the minister should have superseded me in my lieutenancy. But he had not filled up the vacancy, and received my apologies very graciously. Thus am I, continued Cogalos, lieutenant of the Spanish Guards, and my situation is exactly to my mind. The circle of my friends is respectable and pleasant, and I live at my ease among them. Would I could say as much! Exclaimed Don Andrew, but I am very far from being satisfied with my lot. I have lost my appointment, which was not without its advantages, and have no friends of sufficient interest to procure me a better berth. Excuse me, Signor Don Andrew, cried I, with a sort of upbraiding smile, you have a friend in me who may chance to be better than no friend at all. I have told you already that I am a greater favourite with my Lord Duke than with the Duke of Lerma, and will you tell me to my face that you have no interest at court? Have you not already experienced the contrary? Recollect that, through the Archbishop of Granada's powerful recommendation, I procured you a nomination for Mexico, where you would have made your fortune, if love had not stepped in and marred it at Alicante. My means are now more extensive, since I have the ear of the Prime Minister. I give myself up to you then, replied Tordesillas, but do not send me into New Spain, though the first appointment in the colonies were at your disposal. Here we were interrupted by Donna Helena, who came into the room, and improved even upon the visions of my fancy by the reality of her charms. Cogalos introduced me as the companion who had solaced the tedious hours of his imprisonment. Yes, madam, said I to Donna Helena, my conversation did indeed soothe his sorrows, for it turned on you. The compliment was not thrown away, and I took my leave with repeated congratulations. With respect to Tordesillas, I assured him that within a week he should know how far my power, as well as will, extended. Nor were these mere words. On the very next day, the opportunity occurred. Santillane, said His Excellency, the place of governor in the royal prison of Valladolid is vacant, it is worth more than 300 pistoles a year, and is yours if you will accept of it. Not if it were worth 10,000 ducats, answered I, for it would carry me away from your lordship. But, replied the minister, you may fill it by deputy, and only visit occasionally. That is as it may be, rejoined I, but I shall only accept it on condition of resigning in favour of Don Andrew de Tordesillas, a brave and loyal gentleman. I should like to give him this place in acknowledgement of his kindness to me in the Tower of Segovia. Gil Blas accepting appointment. Gil Blas accepting appointment. This plea made the minister laugh heartily, and say, as far as I see, Gil Blas, you mean to make yourself a general patron. Even so be it, my friend, the vacancy is yours for Tordesillas, but tell me unfeignedly what fellow feeling you have in the business, for you are not such a fool as to throw away your interest for nothing. My lord, answered I, Don Andrew charged me nothing for all his acts of friendship, and should not a man repay his obligations? You are become highly moral and self-mortified, replied His Excellency, rather more so than under the last administration. Precisely so, rejoined I, then evil communication corrupted my principles, bargain and sale were the order of the day, and I conformed to the established practice. Now, all preferment is allotted on the footing of a meritorious free gift, and my integrity shall not be the last to fall in with the fashion. Chapter 14. Santillane's visit to Poet Núñez, the company and conversation. One day, after dinner, a fancy seized me to go and see the poet of the Asturias, feeling a sort of curiosity to know on what floor he lodged. I repaired to the house of Señor Don Bertrand Gómez del Ribero, and asked for Núñez. He does not live here now, said the porter, but over the way, in apartments at the back of the house. I went thither, and, crossing a small court, entered an unfurnished parlour, where my friend Fabricio was sitting at table, doing the honours to 5 or 6 guests from the hamlet and liberty of Parnassus. They were at the latter end of a feast, and of course at the beginning of an affray, but as soon as they perceived me, a dead silence succeeded to their obstreperous argumentation. Núñez rose from his seat with much pomp and circumstance of politeness to receive me, saying, Gentlemen, Señor de Santillane. He does me the honour to visit me under this humble roof, as the favourite of the Prime Minister, you will all join with me in tendering your humble services. At this introduction, the worshipful company got up and made their best bows, for my rank could not fail of procuring me respect from the manufacturers of dedications. Though I was neither hungry nor thirsty, it was impossible not to sit down and drink a toast in such society. My presence appearing to be a restraint, "Gentlemen," said I, "it should seem that I have interrupted your conversation, resume it, or you drive me away." "My learned friends," said Fabricio, "were discussing the Iphigenia of Euripides." The bachelor, Melchior de Villegas, a clever man of the first rank in the Republic of Letters, resumed the topic by asking Don Jacinto de Rome which was the point of interest in that tragedy. Don Jacinto ascribed it to the imminent danger of Iphigenia. The bachelor contended, offering to prove his proposition by all the evidence admissible at the bar of logic or criticism, that the danger of a trumpery girl had nothing to do with the real sympathy of that affecting piece. "What has to do with it then?" bawled the old licentiate Gabriel of Leon, indignantly. "It turns with the wind," replied the bachelor. The whole company burst into a shout of laughter at this assertion, which they were far from considering as serious, and I myself thought that Melchior had only launched it by way of adding the zest of wit to the severity of critical discussion. But I was out in my calculation respecting the character of that eminent scholar. He had not a grain of sprightliness or pleasantry in his whole composition. "Laugh as you please, gentlemen," replied he, very coolly, "I maintain that there is no circumstance but the wind, unless it be the weathercock, to interest, to strike, to rouse the passions of the spectator. Figure to yourselves a multitudinous army assembled for the purpose of laying siege to Troy, take into the account the eager haste of the officers and common men to carry their enterprise into execution, that they may return with their best legs foremost into Greece, where they have left everything most dear to them, their household gods, their wives, and their children. All this while a mischievous wind from the wrong quarter keeps them port-bound at Aulis, and, as it were, drives a nail into the very head of the expedition, so that, till better weather, it was impossible to go and lay siege to Priam's town. Wind and weather, therefore, make up the interest of this tragedy. My good wishes are with the Greeks, my whole faculties are wrapped up in the success of their design, the sailing of their fleet is with me the only hinge of the fable, and I look at the danger of Iphigenia with somewhat of a self-interested complacency, because by her death the winding up of the story into a brisk and favourable gale was likely to be accelerated." As soon as Villegas had finished his criticism, the laugh burst out more than ever at his expense. Nunez was sly enough to side with him, that a fairer scope and broader mark might be presented to the shafts of malicious wit which were let fly from all the quarters in the shipman's cart at this poster of the sea and land. But the bachelor, eyeing them all with sublime indifference and supreme contempt, gave them to understand how low in the list of the ignorant and vulgar they ranked in his estimation. Every moment did I expect to see these vapouring spirits kindle into a blaze, and wage war against the hairy honours of each other's brainless skulls, but the joke was not carried to that length. They confined their hostilities to opprobrious epithets, and took their leave when they had eaten and drunk as much as they could get. After their departure, I asked Fabricio why he had separated himself from his treasurer, and whether they had quarrelled. "Quarrelled," answered he, "heaven defend me from such a misfortune. I am on better terms than ever with Signor Don Bertrand, who gave his consent to my living apart from him. Here, therefore, I receive my friends, and take my pleasure with them unmolested. You know very well that I am not of a temper to lay up treasures for those who are to come after me, and as it happens luckily, I am now in circumstances to give my little classical entertainments every day." "I am delighted at it, New York dear Nunez," replied I, "and once more wish you joy on the success of your last tragedy. The great Lope, by his 800 dramatic pieces, never made a quarter of the money which you have got by the damnation of your Count de Saldana." Book the 12th. Chapter 1. Gil Blas sent to Toledo by the minister. The purpose of his journey and its success. For nearly a month His Excellency had been saying to me every day, "Santillane, the time is approaching when I shall call your choicest powers of address into action," but the time that was coming never came. It is a long lane, however, where there is no turning, and His Excellency at length spoke to me nearly as follows: "They say that there is, in the company of comedians at Toledo, a young actress of much note for her personal and professional fascinations. It is affirmed that she dances and sings like all the muses and graces put together, and that the whole theatre rings with applause at her performance. To these perfections is added matchless and irresistible beauty. Such a star should only shine within the circle of a court. The king has a taste for the stage, for music, and for dancing, nor must he be debarred from the pleasure of seeing and hearing such a prodigy. I have determined on sending you to Toledo, that you may judge for yourself whether she really is so extraordinary an actress. On your feeling of her merit my measures shall be taken, for I have unlimited confidence in your discernment." I undertook to bring his lordship a good account of this business, and made my arrangements for setting out with one servant, but not in the minister's livery, by way of conducting matters more warily, and that precaution relished well with His Excellency. On my arrival at Toledo, I had scarcely alighted at the inn, when the landlord, taking me for some country gentleman, said, "Please your honour, you are probably come to be present at the august ceremony of an auto de fe tomorrow." I answered in the affirmative, the more completely to mislead him and keep my own counsel. "You will see," replied he, "one of the prettiest processions you ever saw in your life. There are said to be more than 100 prisoners, and 10 of them are to be roasted." In good truth, next morning, before sunrise, I heard all the bells in the town peal merrily, and the design of their bob majors was to acquaint the people that the pastime was about to begin. Curious to see what sort of a recreation it was, I dressed in a hurry, and posted to the scene of action. All about that quarter, and along the streets where the procession was to pass, were scaffolds, on one of which I purchased a standing. The Dominicans walked first, preceded by the banner of the Inquisition. These Christian fathers were immediately followed by the hapless victims of the Holy Office selected for this day's burnt offering. These devoted wretches walked one by one, with their head and feet bare, each of them with a taper in his hand, and a fiery, not baptismal godfather by his side. Some had large yellow scapularies, worked with crosses of St. Andrew in red, others wore sugar loaf caps of paper, illustrated with flames and diabolical figures of all sorts by way of emblem. As I looked narrowly at these objects of religious gaze, with a compassion in my heart which might have been construed criminal, had it run over from my eyes, I fancied that the Reverend Father Hilary and his companion Brother Ambrose were among those who figured in the sugar loaf caps. They passed too near for me to be deceived. What do I see? Thought I inwardly. Heaven, wearied out with the wicked lives of these two scoundrels, has given them up to the justice of the Inquisition. My whole frame trembled at the thought, and my spirits were scarcely equal to support me from fainting. My connection with these knaves, the adventure at Zelva, all our pranks in partnership rushed upon my memory, and I did not know how sufficiently to thank God for having preserved me from St. Andrew's crosses and the painted devils on the paper caps. When the ceremony was over, I returned to the inn with my heart sickening at the dreadful sight, but painful impressions soon wear away, and I thought only of my commission and its due accomplishment. I waited with impatience for playtime, as the moment and scene of my commencing operations. On the opening of the doors I repaired to the theatre, and took my seat next to a knight of Alcantara. We soon got into chat. "Sir," said I, "the players here have been represented to me in very favourable terms, may I give credit to general report?" "The company is not contemptible," replied the knight, "they have some first-rate performers, among the rest, the peerless Lucretia, an actress of 14, who will astonish you, and she plays one of her best parts tonight." On the drawing up of the curtain, two actresses came on, with every advantage of dress and stage effect, but neither of them could possibly be the object of my search. At length Lucretia made her appearance at the back scene, and walked forwards amidst a thunder of applause. "Ah! This is she, indeed," thought I, "and a delicate specimen of loveliness, as I am a sinner." In her very first speech she proved herself a child of nature with energy and conception far above her years, and the approbation of a provincial audience was confirmed by my metropolitan judgment. The knight was happy to find I liked her, and assured me that if I had heard her sing, my ears might have rejoiced to the sorrow of my heart. Her dancing, too, he represented as not less formidable to the free will of lordly man. I inquired what youth, blessed as the immortal gods, had the exquisite happiness of bringing himself to beggary for so sweet a girl. "She is under no avowed protection," said he. "And scandal has not coupled her name with private license, but Lucretia must take care of herself, for she is under the wing of her Aunt Estella, and there is not an actress in the company so warmly fledged for hatching the tender passions into life." At the name of Estella, I inquired with some eagerness who she was. "One of our best performers," said my informant. "She does not play tonight, to our great loss, for her cast is that of Abigail's, and she humours them to perfection. A little too broad, perhaps, but that is a fault on the right side." From the features of the description, there could be no doubt but this must be Laura, that lady so notorious in these memoirs, whom I left at Granada. To make assurance doubly sure, I went behind the scenes after the play. There she was, in the green room, flirting with some men of fashion, who probably endured the aunt for the sake of the niece. I came up to pay my devotions, but whim, or perhaps revenge for my cutting and running from Granada, determined her to put on the stranger, and receive my compliments with so discouraging a coldness as to throw me into some little confusion. Instead of laughing it off, I was fool enough to be angry, and withdrew in a choleric determination to return next day. "Laura shall smart for this," said I, "her niece shall not appear at court. I will tell the minister that she dances like a she-bear, has formed her bravura between the scream of a peahen and the cackle of a goose, acts like a puppet, and comprehends like an idiot." Such was my scheme of revenge, but it proved abortive. Just as I was going out of town, a footboy brought me the following note: "Forget and forgive, and follow the bearer." I obeyed, and found Laura at her dressing table in very elegant apartments near the theatre. She rose to welcome me, saying, "Signor Gil Blas, you have every reason to be offended at your reception behind the scenes, which was out of character between such old friends, but I really was most abominably disconcerted. Just as you came up, one of our gentlemen had brought me some scandalous stories about my niece, whose honour has always been dearer to me than my own. On coming to myself, I immediately sent my servant to find you out, with the intention of making you amends today." "You have done so already, my dear Laura," said I, "let us therefore talk over old times. You may remember that I left you in a very ticklish predicament when conscience and the fear of punishment drove me so precipitately from Granada. How did you get off with your Portuguese lover?" Easily enough, answered Laura, do not you know that in those cases men are mere fools, and acquit us women without even calling for our defense? I faced the Marquis of Marialva out that you were my very brother, and drew upon my impudence for the support of my credit. Do you not see, said I to my Portuguese dupe, that this is all the contrivance of jealousy and rage? My rival, Narcissa, infuriated at my possession of a heart which she had vainly attempted to gain, has bribed the candle snuffer to assert that he has seen me as Arsenia's waiting woman at Madrid. It is an abominable falsehood. The widow of Don Antonio Coelho has always been too high in her notions to be the hanger-on of a theatrical mistress. Besides, what completely disproves the whole allegation is my brother's precipitate retreat. If he were here, it would be a subject of evidence, but Narcissa must have devised some stratagem to get him out of the way. These reasons, continued Laura, were not the most convincing in the world, but they did very well for the Marquis, and that good, easy nobleman continued his confidence till his return to Portugal. This happened soon after your departure, and Zapata's wife had the pleasure of seeing me lose what she could not win. After this, I stayed some years longer at Granada, till the company was broken up in consequence of some squabbles, which will take place in mimic as well as in real life. Some went to Seville, others to Cordova, and I came to Toledo, where I have been for these 10 years with my niece Lucretia, whose performance you must have seen last night. This was too much to be taken gravely. Laura inquired why I laughed. Can that be a question? Said I, you have neither brother nor sister, one or other of which is a necessary ingredient in an aunt. Besides, when I calculate in my mind the lapse of time since our last separation, and compare that period with the age of your niece, it is more than possible that your relationship may be in a nearer degree of kin. I understand you, replied Don Antonio's widow, with something like a moral tinge of red in her cheek, you are an accurate chronologist. There is no garbling facts in defiance of your memory. Well then. Lucretia is my daughter by the Marquis of Marialva. It was extremely wrong, but I cannot conceal it from you. The confession must indeed be a shock to your modesty, said I, after telling me yourself what pranks you played with the hospital steward at Zamora. I must tell you moreover that Lucretia is an article of so superior a quality, as to render you a public benefactor by having thrown her into the market. It were to be wished that the stolen embraces of all your fraternity might be blessed with fruitfulness, if they could secure to themselves a patent for breeding after your sample. Should any sarcastic reader, comparing this passage with some circumstances related while I was the Marquis's secretary, suspect me of being entitled to dispute the honours of paternity with that nobleman, I blush to say that my claims are entirely out of the question. I laid open my principal adventures to Laura in my turn, as well as the present state of my affairs. She listened with interest, and said, Friend Santillane, you seem to play a principal part on the stage of the world, and I congratulate you most heartily. Should Lucretia be engaged at Madrid, I flatter myself she will find a powerful protector in Signor de Santillane. Doubt it not, answered I, your daughter may have her engagement whenever you please, I can promise you that, without presuming too much on my interest. I take you at your word, replied Laura, and would set out tomorrow, were I not under articles to this company. An order from court will cut the knot of any articles, rejoined I, and that I take upon myself, you shall have it within a week. It is an act of chivalry to rescue Lucretia from Toledo, such a pretty little actress belongs to the royal court, as parcel of the manor. Lucretia came into the room just as I was talking of her. The goddess Hebe herself never looked better in her best days, it was nature in the bud, exhaling the sweets of her earliest bloom, but promising a more luxuriant waste of treasure. She was just up, and her natural beauty, without the aid of art, communicated the most rapturous sensations. Come, niece, said her mother, thank the gentleman for all his kindness to us, he is an old friend of mine, who ranks high at court, and undertakes to get us both an engagement at the Theatre Royal. The little girl seemed to be much pleased, and made me a low courtesy, saying, with an enchanting smile, I most humbly thank you for your obliging intention, but, by taking me from a partial audience, are you certain that I shall not be looked down upon by that of Madrid? I may but lose by the exchange. I remember hearing my aunt say that she has seen players most favourably received in one town, and hissed off the stage in another. This absolutely frightens me, beware. Therefore, of exposing me to the derision of the court, and yourself to its reproaches. Lovely Lucretia, answered I, we have neither of us anything to fear, I am rather apprehensive, lest, by the havoc you will make among hearts, you should excite rivalships and kindle discord among the courtiers. My niece's fears, said Laura, are better founded than yours, but I hope they will both prove vain, however feeble may be Lucretia's charms of person, her talents as an actress are at least above mediocrity. We continued the conversation for some time, and I could gather, from Lucretia's share in it, that she was a girl of superior talents. On taking leave, I assured them that they should immediately receive a summons to Madrid. Chapter 2. Santillane makes his report to the minister, who commissions him to send for Lucretia. The first appearance of that actress before the court. On my return, I found my Lord Duke impatient to be informed of my success. Have you seen her? Said he, is she worth transplanting? My lord, answered I, fame, which generally runs beyond all discretion in its report of beauty, has erred on the side of parsimony in its estimate of the matchless young Lucretia. She is all that youthful poets fancy when they feign, for personal attractions, and all that veteran managers seek when they sign articles, in scenic qualifications. Is it possible? Exclaimed the minister with a satisfaction which involuntarily peeped out at his eyes, and made me think he had some selfish hankerings after the article of my marketing at Toledo. Is it possible? And is she really so charming a creature? When you see her, replied I, you will own that any verbal picture of her perfections must be altogether inadequate to their due description. His Excellency then requiring a minute account of my journey, I gave him all the particulars, not excepting Laura's story, and Lucretia's parentage. His lordship was delighted at the latter circumstance, and enjoined me, with a cordial compliment on my skill in such delicate negotiations, to finish as auspiciously as I had begun my undertaking. I went to look for Carnero, and told him that it was His Excellency's pleasure he should make out an order for the admission of Estella and Lucretia, actresses from the Toledo Theatre, into His Majesty's company. Say you so, Signor de Santillane? Answered Carnero with a sarcastic leer, you shall not be kept long in suspense, since you take so marked an interest in the fortunes of these two ladies. He expedited the order in my presence, and within a week the mother and daughter sent me notice of their arrival. I immediately hastened to their lodging near the theatre, and after an interchange of thanks on their part, and assurances of continued support on mine, left them with my best wishes for a brilliant career of success. Their names were announced in the bills as two new actresses, engaged by the special mandate of the court. They made their first appearance in a play which they had been accustomed to perform in at Toledo with loud and unanimous applause. Novelty is the very life and soul of theatrical entertainments. The house was uncommonly crowded, and I, of course, was among the audience. I was rather frightened before the curtain drew up. Prejudiced as I was in favor of the candidates, my alarm was in proportion to my interest. But when once they were fairly on the boards, the din of welcome quieted all my apprehensions. Estella was considered as a first-rate actress in comic parts, and Lucretia as a female Roscius in heroines and love-sick damsels. But the love which she feigned herself she really kindled in the hearts of the spectators. Some admired the beauty of her eyes, others were touched with the plaintive sweetness of her voice, and all, bowing to the triumph of youth, vivacity, and elegance, went away in raptures with her person. My Lord Duke, who took an uncommon interest in this theatrical event, was at the play that evening. I saw him leave his box at the end of the piece with evident approbation of our new performers. Curious to know whether they equaled his expectations, I followed him home, and into his closet, saying, well, my lord, is your Excellency well pleased with little Marialva? My Excellency, answered he with a sly smile, must be very difficult to be pleased, not to confirm the public voice. Yes, indeed, my good friend, I am enraptured with your Lucretia, and firmly believe that the king will not see her without emotion. Chapter 3. Lucretia's popularity, her appearance before the king, his passion, and its consequences. Great was the noise about the court on this double acquisition to the theatre. It became the topic of conversation next day at the king's levee. The young Lucretia was most in the mouths of the nobility, who described her so feelingly, that His Majesty could not but imbibe the impression, though he was too polite to express his interest either in words or by looks. To make amends for that restraint, he questioned the minister as soon as he was alone with him, who stated the success of a young actress from Toledo on the evening before. Her name, added he, is Lucretia, and it is really a pity that ladies of her profession should ever have been christened by any less chaste appellative. She is an acquaintance of Santillane, who spoke so highly of her, that I thought it right to engage her for your Majesty's company. The king smiled at the mention of my name, recollecting, perhaps, through what channel he became acquainted with Catalina, and foreboding a like assistance on the present occasion. Count, said he to the minister, I mean to see this Lucretia act tomorrow, and will thank you to let her know it. I was, of course, sent with this intelligence to the two actresses. Great news! Said I to Laura, whom I saw first, you will have the sovereign of the Spanish monarchy among your audience tomorrow, as the minister has desired me to inform you. I cannot doubt but you will both of you do your best to prove yourselves worthy of a royal command, but I would advise you to choose a piece with music and dancing, that all Lucretia's accomplishments may be displayed at one view. We will take your counsel, answered Laura, and it shall not be our faults if His Majesty is disappointed. That can scarcely happen, said I, seeing Lucretia come into the room in an undress, which showed her person to more advantage than all the wardrobe of the theatre. He will be the more delighted with your lovely niece, because dancing and music are his principal pleasures. He may even be tempted to throw her the handkerchief. I do not at all wish, replied Laura, that he should be that way inclined, all-powerful monarch as he is. He might not find the accomplishment of his desires so easy. Lucretia, though brought up behind the scenes, is not without virtuous principles. Whatever pleasure she may take in applause and professional reputation, she had much rather preserve the character of a good girl than establish that of a great actress. And, said little Marialva, joining in the conversation, why conjure up monsters only to lay them again? I shall never be at a loss to repel the king's advances, because his taste is too refined to stoop so low. But, charming Lucretia, said I, if such a thing should happen, would you be cruel enough to let him languish like a common lover? Why not? Answered she. Setting virtue aside, my vanity would be more flattered by my own resistance than by the tribute of his affection. I was not a little surprised to hear a pupil of Laura's school talk so properly, and to find that with so free an education she imbibed such unusual principles of morality. The king, impatient to see Lucretia, went to the play next evening. The piece was got up with music and dancing, to show our young actress off to the best advantage. My eyes were fixed on his majesty, but he completely eluded my penetration by an obstinate gravity. On the following day, the minister said, Santillane, I have just been with the king, who has been talking about Lucretia with so much animation, that I doubt not but he is smitten, and, as I told him that you had sent for her from Toledo, he expressed a wish to confer with you in private on the subject. Orders are given for your admittance. Run, and bring me back an account of what passes. I flew to the palace, and found the king alone. He was walking up and down, in much apparent perplexity. He put several questions to me about Lucretia, made me relate her history, and then asked whether the little jade had not been tampering with chastity already. I boldly assured him to the contrary, though such pledges were somewhat hazardous in general, but mine was taken, and gave the prince much pleasure. If so, replied he, I select you for my agent with Lucretia, let her become acquainted with her triumph from your lips. He then put a box of jewels into my hand, worth 50,000 crowns, with a message begging her acceptance of them, and promising more substantial proofs of his affection. Before I went on this errand, I reported progress to my Lord Duke. That minister, I thought, would be more vexed than rejoiced at it, supposing that he had his own views of gallantry towards Lucretia, and would learn with regret the rivalship of his master, but I was mistaken. Far from appearing chagrined, his joy was so excessive that it would ooze out at his tongue in words which were not quite lost on the hearer. Indeed, friend Philip. Then I have you in my clutches, while your pleasures lead you, your business must be left to me. This side speech explained to me the plot, an amorous prince, and a long-headed minister. My orders were to execute my commission as speedily as possible, with the assurance that the first lord in the land would be proud to stand in my shoes. Besides, there was no pimp of rank, as in the former case, to seize the profit and leave the infamy with me. The honour and emolument were now exclusively my own. Thus did His Excellency relish the ingredients of panderism to my palate, and I tasted them with the greediness, but not without the qualms, of an epicure, for since my imprisonment I had become regenerate, and did not take pride in dirty work, because my employer washed his hands in perfumed water. But though conscience was awake, interest was not asleep. I was no longer a villain for the fun of it, but my compliance would confirm my footing with the minister, and him it was my duty, at all events, to please. My first appeal was to Laura in private. I opened the negotiation delicately, and presented my credentials in the form of the jewel box. The lady was thrown off her guard by the display. Signor Gil Blas, cried she, you are one of my oldest friends, and I must not play the hypocrite. Straight-laced morals are inconsistent with the discipline of my section. Nothing can be more delightful to me than a conquest, which throws such a game into our hands. But, between ourselves, I am afraid Lucretia is not so enlightened as we are, though a daughter of Thalia. She has taken the better-behaved goddesses for her schoolmistresses, and given a rebuff to two young noblemen of amiable manners and large fortunes. They were not kings, you will say, and truly we may hope that Lucretia's virtue will be too undisciplined to stand a royal siege, but you must remember the event is hazardous, and I shall not interpose my authority to compel her. If, far from thinking herself honoured by the fleeting passion of the king, she should revolt from his advances with disdain, let not our illustrious sovereign be offended at her reserve. But do you come back hither tomorrow, and carry back either the jewels or a return of affection. I had no doubt but Laura would tutor Lucretia in the school of time-serving morality, and depended much on her instruction. It was therefore no small surprise to find that Laura worked as much against wind and tide to launch her daughter into the trade wind of evil, as other maternal pilots to set the sails of theirs in the contrary monsoon of good, and what is still more unaccountable, Lucretia, after tasting of royal delights, was so completely surfeited with the banquet as to throw herself at once into the arms of the church, where she professed, fell sick, and died of grief. Laura, disconsolate for the loss of her daughter, and the part she herself had acted in the tragedy, retired into a convent of female penitents, and did penance for the unhallowed pleasures of her former life. The king was affected by his sudden loss, but soon found comfort in some other pursuit. The premier talked little on the subject, but thought so much the more, as the reader will easily believe. Chapter 4. Santillane in a new office. My feelings were all alive to Lucretia's ill fate, and my own infamy in having contributed to it. The royal wants of the lover were no excuse for my taking the post of cheapener, and I determined to resign the staff of office in that department, entreating the minister to employ me in some other. He was charmed with my nice sense of honour, and promised to comply with my scruples, laying open his inmost heart in the following speech. Some years before I was in office, chance threw me across a lady of such shape and beauty as induced me to trace her home. I learned that she was a Genoese, by name Donna Margarita Spinola, supporting herself at Madrid on the income arising from her beauty. It was reported that Don Francisco de Valizer, an officer about the court, a rich man, an old man, and a married man, laid out his money very freely on this hazardous speculation. These rumors ought to have deterred me, but they only whetted my desires to share with Valizer. To gain my end, I had recourse to a female broker of tenderness, who adjusted the terms of a private interview with the Genoese, and the price current being settled, the traffic was frequently repeated. It was an open market for my rival and me, or possibly for many other bidders. Let that be as it may, a choice boy was in the fullness of time produced to the club, and the mother complimented every member individually in private with the credit, but we were each of us too modest to acknowledge a bantling which had so probable a claim upon a better father, so that the Genoese was compelled to maintain him on the profits of her profession. This she did for 18 years, and dying at the end of that period, has left her son without a farthing, and, what is worse, without an idea or an accomplishment. Such, continued his lordship, is the confidence I meant to repose in you, and I shall now lay open the great design I have formed to draw this unfortunate child from his obscurity, reverse the colour of his fate, raise him to the highest honours, and acknowledge him as my son. At so extravagant a project it was impossible not to be open-mouthed. What, sir, exclaimed I, can your excellency have adopted so strange a resolution? Excuse my freedom, but my zeal cannot restrain itself. You will be of my mind, replied he with eagerness, when I shall have explained to you my motives. I have no mind that my estates should descend in the collateral line. You will tell me, that I am not so old as to despair of having children by Madame de Oliveras. But every one is best judge of his own condition. Know therefore that there is not a receipt in the whole extent of chemistry which I have not tried, but without effect, to appear once again in the character of a father. Wherefore, since fortune, stepping in to cover the defects of nature, presents me with a child whose parent after all I may actually be, he is mine by adoption, that is a settled point. When I found the minister determined, I no longer argued against his resolution, as knowing him to be a man who would rather do a foolish act of his own than adopt a wise suggestion of another. It only remains now, added he, to educate Don Henry Philip de Guzman, for by that name I intend him to be known in the world, till the time arrives when he may aspire to higher dignities. You, my dear Santillane, I have chosen to superintend his conduct. I have full confidence in your talents and friendship, to regulate his household, direct his studies, and make him an accomplished gentleman. I would willingly have declined the office, as never having exercised the craft of a pedagogue, which required much more genius and solidity than mine, but he shut my mouth by saying it was his absolute determination that I should be tutor to this adopted son, whom he designed for the first offices of the monarchy. As a bribe for my compliance, his lordship increased my little income with a pension of 1,000 crowns on the commandery of Mambra. Chapter 5. The son of the Genoese is acknowledged by a legal instrument, and named Don Henry Philip de Guzman. Santillane establishes his household, and arranges the course of his studies. The act of adoption was soon legalized with the king's consent and good pleasure. Don Henry Philip de Guzman, as this descendant from a committee of fathers was named, became acknowledged successor to the earldom of Oliveras and the duchy of Sanlúcar. The minister, to give the act all possible publicity, communicated it through Carnero to the ambassadors and grandees of Spain, who were somewhat startled. The jokers of Madrid were not insensible to the ridicule, and the satirical poets made their harvest of so fine a subject for their pen. I asked my Lord Duke where my pupil was. Here in town, answered he, with an aunt from whom I shall remove him as soon as you have got a house ready. This I did immediately, and furnished it magnificently. When my establishment was complete in servants and officers, His Excellency sent for this equivocal production, this spurious offset from the renowned stock of the Guzmans. The lad was tall and personable. Don Henry, said his lordship, pointing to me, this gentleman is to be your tutor, and introduce you into the world. He has my entire confidence, and an unlimited authority over you. After much good advice, and many compliments to me, the minister retired, and I took Don Henry home. As soon as we got thither, I introduced him to his household, and explained the nature of each individual's employment. He did not seem at all disconcerted at the change of circumstances, but received the obeisances of his dependents as if he had been a lord by nature, and not by chance. He was not without mother wit, but ignorant in a deplorable degree. He could scarcely read and write. I gave him masters for the Latin grammar, geography, history, and fencing. A dancing master of course was not forgotten, but in an affair of the first consequence, selection was difficult, for there were more eminent professors of that art in Madrid than of all the languages and sciences put together. While I was pondering on this difficulty, a man gaudily dressed came into the courtyard and inquired for me. I went down, supposing him to be at least a knight of some military or privileged order. Signor de Santillane, said he, with a profusion of bows which anticipated his line in life, I am come to offer you my services as Don Henry's governor. My name is Martin Ledreau, and I have, thank heaven, some reputation in the world. I have no occasion to canvass for scholars, that is all very well for petty dancing masters. My custom is to wait till I am sent for, but being a sort of appendage to the house of Guzman, and having taught its various branches for a long period, I thought it a point of respect to wait on you first. I perceive, answered I, that you are just the man we want. What are your terms? 4 double pistoles a month, answered he, and I give but 2 lessons a week. 4 doubloons a month. Cried I, that is an exorbitant price. Exorbitant? Rejoined he with astonishment, why? It is not more than 8 times as much as you would give to a mathematical master or a Greek professor. There was no resisting so ludicrous a comparison of merit. I laughed outright, and asked Signor Ledreau whether he really thought his talents worth more than those of the first proficients in learning and science. Most assuredly, said he, at least, if you measure our pretensions by their respective utility. What sort of machines may those be which are fashioned under their hands? Jointless puppets, unlicked cubs, open-mouthed and impenetrable shellfish, but our lessons supple and render pliant the intractable stiffness of their component parts, and bring them insensibly into shape. In short, we communicate to them a graceful motion, a polite address, the carriage of good company, and the outward marks of elevated rank. I could not but give way to such cogent arguments in favor of the dancing master's occupation, and engaged him about Don Henry's person, without haggling as to terms, since those specified were only at the rate established by the leading professors of the art. Chapter 6. Scipio's return from New Spain. Gil Blas places him about Don Henry's person. That young nobleman's course of study. His career of honor, and his father's matrimonial speculation on his behalf. A patent of nobility conferred on Gil Blas against his will. I had not yet half arranged Don Henry's household, when Scipio returned from Mexico. He brought with him 3,000 ducats in cash, and merchandise to double the amount. I wish you joy, said I, the foundation of your fortune is laid, and if you prefer a snug berth at Madrid to the risk of going back, you have only to tell me so. There is no question about that, said the son of Cosclina, a genteel situation at home is far preferable to a second voyage. After relating the birth and adventures of the little adopted Guzman, and my own appointment as tutor, I offered him the situation of upper servant to this babe of chance. Scipio, who could have devised nothing better for himself, readily accepted the office, and within the small space of 3 or 4 days got the length of his new master's foot. I had taken it for granted that the verb grinders and concord manufacturers to whom I had given the plant of this Genoese bastard would lose stock and block, under the idea that he was of an intractable and profitless age, but my forebodings were completely reversed. He not only comprehended, but easily retained the lessons of his masters, and they were very well satisfied with him. I was in an enormous hurry to greet the ears of my Lord Duke with this intelligence, and he received it with abundant joy. Santillane, exclaimed he with delight, you give me new life by the assurance of Don Henry's capacity and application. It runs in the blood of the Guzmans, and I am the more confirmed in his being unquestionably my own, because I am just as fond of him as if Madame de Oliveras herself had lain in of the brat in due form under this very roof. The voice of nature, you perceive, will make itself heard. I thought it unnecessary to give his lordship any opinion on that subject. But with a delicate deference to his credulity, left him to enjoy his fancied paternity in peace, whether well or ill-founded. Though all the Guzmans held this clod of newly turned-up nobility in utter scorn, they were politic enough to smooth over the corrugations of their contempt, nay, some of them even affected to languish for his good opinion. The ambassadors and principal nobility then at Madrid waited on him with all the ceremony appertaining to the rank of a legitimate son. The minister, intoxicated with the fumes of incense offered to his idol, began to build a temple worthy of the worship. The cross of Alcantara was the foundation, with the commandery of 10,000 crowns. The next step was to a high office in the royal household, and the completion of the whole was matrimony. Wishing to connect him with a family of the first rank, he picked out Donna Johanna de Velasco, daughter to the Duke of Castile, and had influence enough to accomplish the alliance, though against the will of the Duke and of all his kindred. Some days before the nuptial ceremony, his lordship put some papers into my hand, saying, "Here, Gil Blas, is a patent of nobility which I have procured as the reward of your services." "My lord," answered I, in much astonishment, "your excellency knows very well that I am the son of an usher and a duenna. It would be caricaturing the peerage to confer it on me, and besides, of all the boons in his majesty's power to bestow, it is that which I deserve and desire the least." "Your birth," replied the minister, "is a slight objection. You have been employed on affairs of state under the Duke of Lerma's administration and under mine. Besides," added he with a smile, "have you not rendered some things to Caesar which Caesar is bound, on the honor of a prince, to render back in another shape? To deal candidly, Santillane, you will make just as good a lord as the best of them. Nay, more than that, your high office about my son is incompatible with plebeian rank, and therefore have I procured you to be created." "Since your excellency will have it so," replied I, "there is no more to be said." So, saying no more, I put my new blown honors in my pocket, and walked off. Gil Blas receiving patent of nobiety. Gil Blas receiving patent of nobiety. Now can I make any Joan a lady? Said I to myself when I had got into the street, but it was not the handiwork of my parents that made me a gentleman. I may add a foot of honor to my name whenever I please, and if any of my acquaintance should snuff or snigger when they call me Don, I may suck my teeth, lean upon my elbow, and draw out my credentials of heraldry. But let us see what they contain, and how the corporeal particles, which have accrued during my artificial contact with the court, are distinguished by genealogical metaphysics from the native clay of my original extraction. The instrument ran thus in substance, that the king, in acknowledgement of my zeal in more than one instance for his service and the good of the state, had been graciously pleased to confer this mark of distinction on me. I may safely say that the recollection of the act for which I was promoted effectually kept down my pride. Neither did the bashfulness of low birth ever forsake me. So that nobility to me was like a hair shirt to a penitent. I determined therefore to lock up the evidences of my shame in a private drawer, instead of blazoning them to dazzle the eyes of the foolish and corrupt. Chapter 7. An accidental meeting between Gil Blas and Fabricio. Their last conversation together, and a word to the wise from Núñez. The poet of the Asturias, as the reader, if he thought of him, may have remarked, was very negligent in his intercourse with me. It was not to be expected that my employments would leave me time to go and look after him. I had not seen him since the critical discussion touching the Iphigenia of Euripides, when chance threw me across him, as he came out of a printing house. I accosted him, saying, So, Master Núñez, you have got among the printers, this looks as if we were threatened with some new production. You may indeed prepare yourselves for such an event, answered he. I have a pamphlet just ready for publication which is likely to make some noise in the literary world. There can be no question about its merit, replied I, but I cannot conceive why you waste your time in writing pamphlets. It should seem as if such squibs and rockets were scarcely worth the powder expended in their manufacture. It is very true, rejoined Fabricio, and I am well aware that none but the most vulgar gazers are caught by such holiday fireworks. However, this single one has escaped me, and I must own that it is a child of necessity. Hunger, as you know, will bring the wolf out of the forest. What? Exclaimed I, is it the author of the account of Saldana who holds this language? A man with an annuity of 2,000 crowns? Gently, my friend, interrupted Núñez, I am no longer a pensioned poet. The affairs of the treasurer Don Bertrand are all at sixes and sevens, he has been at the gaming table, and played with the public money, an extent has issued, and my rent charge is gone post-haste to the devil. That is a sad affair, said I, but may not matters come round again in that quarter? No chance of it, answered he. Señor Gomez del Ribero, in plight as destitute as that of his poor bard, is sunk forever, nor can he, as they say, by any possible contrivance be set afloat again. In that case, my good friend, replied I, we must look out for some post which may make you amends for the loss of your annuity. I will ease your conscience on that score, said he, though you should offer me the wealth of the Indies as a salary in one of your offices, I would reject the boon. Clerkships are no object to a partner in the firm of the Muses, a literary birth or absolute starvation for your humble servant. If you must have it plump, I was born to live and die a poet, and the man whose destiny is hanging will never be drowned. But do not suppose, continued he, that we are altogether forlorn and destitute. Besides that we accommodate the requisites of independence to our finances, we do not look far beyond our noses in calculating the average of our fortunes. It is insinuated that we often dine with the most abstemious orders of the religious, but our sanctity in this particular is too credulously imputed. There is not one of my brother wits, without excepting the calculators of almanacs, who has not a plate laid for him at some substantial table. For my own part, I have the run of 2 good houses. To the master of one I have dedicated a romance, and he is the first commissioner of taxes who was ever associated with the Muses. The other is a rich tradesman in Madrid, whose lust is to get wits about him. He is not nice in his choice, and this town furnishes abundance to those who value wit more by quantity than quality. Then I no longer feel for you, said I to the poet of the Asturias, since you are satisfied in your condition. But be that as it may, I assure you once more, that you have a friend in Gil Blas. However you may slight him, if you want my purse, come and take it, it will not fail you at a pinch, and you must not stand between me and my sincere friendship. By that burst of sentiment, exclaimed Núñez, I know and thank my friend Santillane. In return, let me give you a salutary caution. While my Lord Duke is in his meridian, and you are all in all with him, reap, bind, and gather in your harvest. When the sun sets, the gleaners are sent home. I asked Fabricio whether his suspicions were surely founded, and he returned me this answer, my information comes from an old knight of Calatrava, who pokes his nose into secrets of all sorts. His authority passes current at Madrid, much as that of the Pythian newsmongers did through Greece, and thus his oracle was pronounced in my hearing. My Lord Duke has a host of enemies in battle array against him, he reckons too securely upon his influence with the king, for his majesty, as the report goes, begins to take in hostile representations with patience. I thanked Nunez for his friendly warning, but without much faith in his prediction, my master's authority seemed rooted in the court, like the tempest-scoffing firmness of an oak in the native soil of the forest. Chapter 8. Gil Blas finds that Fabricio's hint was not without foundation. The king's journey to Saragossa. The poet of the Asturias was no bad politician. There was a court plot against the duke, with the queen at the bottom, but their plans were too deeply laid to bubble at the surface. During the space of a whole year, my simplicity was insensible to the brewing of the tempest. The revolt of the Catalans, with France at their back, and the ill success of the war for their suppression, excited the murmurs of the people, and whetted their tongues against government. A council was held in the royal presence, and the Marquis de Grana, the emperor's ambassador, was specially requested to assist. The subject in debate was whether the king should remain in Castile, or go and take the command of his troops in Aragon. The minister spoke first, and gave it as his opinion that his majesty should not quit the seat of government. All the members supported his arguments, with the exception of the Marquis de Grana, whose whole heart was with the House of Austria, and the sentiments of his soul on the tip of his tongue, after the homely honesty of his nation. He argued so forcibly against the minister, that the king embraced his opinion from conviction, though contrary to the vote of council, and fixed the day when he would set out for the army. This was the first time that ever the sovereign had differed from his favourite, and the latter considered it as an inexpiable affront. Just as the minister was withdrawing to his closet, there to bite upon the bridle, he espied me, called me in, and told me with much discomposure what had passed in debate. Yes, Santillane, observed he, the king, who for the last 20 years has spoken only through my mouth, and seen with my eyes, is now to be wheedled over by Grana, and that on the score of zeal for the House of Austria, as if that German had a more Austrian soul in his body than myself. Hence it is easy to perceive, continued the minister, that there is a strong party against me, with the queen at the head. Heaven forbid it, said I. Has not the queen for upwards of 12 years been accustomed to your paramount authority, and have you not taught the king the knack of not consulting her? The desire of making a campaign may for once have enlisted his majesty on the side of the Marquis de Grana. Say rather that the king, argued my lord duke, will be surrounded by his principal officers when in camp, and then the disaffected will find their opportunity for poisoning him against my administration. But they overreach themselves, for I shall completely insulate the prince from all their approaches, and so he did, in a manner which, for example, deserves not to be passed over. The day of the king's departure being arrived, the monarch, leaving the queen regent, proceeded for Saragossa by way of Aranjuez, a delightful residence, where he whiled away 3 weeks. Cuenca was the next stage, where the minister detained him still longer by a succession of amusements. A hunting party was contrived at Molina in Aragon, and hence there was no choice of road but to Saragossa. The army was near at hand, and the king was preparing to review it, but his keeper sickened him of the project, by making him believe that he would be taken by the French, who were in force in the neighbourhood, so that he was cowed by a groundless apprehension, and consented to be a prisoner in his own court. The minister, from an affectionate regard to his safety, secluded him from all approach, so that the principal nobility, who had equipped themselves at enormous charges to be about his person, could not even procure an occasional audience. Philip, weary of bad lodgings and worse recreation at Saragossa, and perhaps feeling himself scarcely his own master, soon returned to Madrid. Thus ended the royal campaign, and the care of maintaining the honour of the Spanish colours was left to the Marquis de los Valles, Commander-in-Chief. Chapter 9. The Revolution of Portugal, and Disgrace of the Prime Minister. A few days after the king's return, an alarming report prevailed at Madrid, that the Portuguese, considering the Catalan revolt as an opportunity offered them by fortune for throwing off the Spanish yoke, had taken arms, and chosen the Duke of Braganza for their king, with the full determination of supporting him on the throne. In this they conceived that they did not reckon without their host, because Spain was then embroiled in Germany, Italy, Flanders, and Catalonia. They could not, in fact, have hit upon a crisis more favourable for their deliverance from so galling a yoke. It was a strange circumstance, that while both court and city were struck with consternation at the news, my lord Duke attempted to joke with the king, and make the Duke of Braganza his butt. Philip, however, far from falling in with this ill-timed pleasantry, assumed a serious air, of ill omen to the minister, who felt his seat to totter under him. The queen was now his declared enemy, and openly accused him of having caused the revolt of Portugal by his misconduct. The nobility in general, and especially those who had been at Saragossa, when they saw a cloud gathering about the minister, joined the queen's party, but the decisive blow was the return of the Duchess Dowager of Mantua from her government of Portugal to Madrid, for she proved clearly to the king's conviction that the counsels of his own cabinet produced the revolution. His Majesty, deeply impressed with what he had heard, was now completely recovered from every symptom of partiality towards his favourite. The minister, finding that his enemies were in possession of the royal ear, wrote for permission to resign his employments, and retire from court, since all the political mischances of the time were ascribed to his personal delinquency. He expected a letter like this to produce a wonderful effect, reckoning as he did upon the prince's private friendship, which could scarcely brook a separation, but his Majesty's answer undeceived him, by laconically complying with his ostensible wish to withdraw. Such a sentence of banishment in the king's own handwriting came like a thunderstorm in harvest, but though destruction to his long-cherished hopes, he affected the serene look of constancy, and asked me what I would do in his circumstances. I would drive before the wind, said I, renounce the ungrateful court, and pass the remainder of my days in peace on my own estate. You counsel wisely, replied my master, and I shall set out for Loches, there to finish my career, after one more interview with his majesty, for I could wish just to convince him that I have done what man can do to support the heavy load of state upon my shoulders, and that it was not within the compass of possibility to prevent the unfortunate events which are imputed to me as a crime. It were equally reasonable to charge the pilot with the wrecking fury of the storm, and make him answerable for the uncontrolled power of the elements. Thus did the minister inwardly flatter himself that he could set things to rights again, and once more fix firm the seat which was shaking under him, but he could not procure an audience, and was even commanded to resign his key of private admission into his majesty's closet. This last requisition convinced him that there was no hope, and he now made up his mind in earnest for retirement. He looked over his papers, and had the prudence to burn a good number. He then selected a small household for his retreat, and publicly announced his departure for the next day. Apprehending insult from the mob, if the time and manner of his setting out were public, he escaped early in the morning through the kitchens out at the back door, got into a shabby, hired carriage, with his confessor and me, and reached in safety the road leading to Loches, a village on his own estate, where his countess had founded a magnificent convent of Dominican nuns. Chapter 10. A difficult, but successful weaning from the world. The minister's employments in his retreat. Madame d'Oliveira stayed behind her husband some few days, with the intention of trying what her tears and entreaties might do towards his recall, but in vain did she prostrate herself before their majesties. The king paid not the least attention to her pleadings and remonstrances, though artfully adapted for effect, and the queen, who hated her mortally, took a savage pleasure in her tears. The minister's lady, however, was not easily discouraged. She stooped so low as to solicit their good offices from the ladies of the bedchamber, but the fruit of all this meanness was only the sad conviction that it excited more contempt than pity. Heartbroken at having degraded herself by supplications so humiliating, and yet so unavailing, she departed to her husband, and mourned with him the loss of a situation, which, under a reign like that of Philip IV, was little short of sovereign power. The accounts her ladyship brought from Madrid were wormwood to the Duke. Your enemies, said she, sobbing, with the Duke of Medina Kelly at their head, are loud in the king's praises for your removal, and the people triumph in your disgrace with an insolent joy, as if the cloud of adversity were to be dispelled by the breath which dissolved your administration. Madam, said my master, follow my example, suppress your discontent, we must drive before the storm when we cannot weather it. I did think, indeed, that my favour would only be eclipsed with the lamp of life, a common illusion of ministers and favourites, who forget that they breathe but at the good pleasure of their sovereign. Was not the Duke of Lerma as much mistaken as myself, though fondly relying on his purple, as a pledge for the lasting tenure of his authority? Thus did my Lord Duke preach patience to the partner of his cares, while his own bosom heaved under the direct pressure of anxiety. The frequent dispatches from Don Henry, who was staying about the court to pick up information, kept him continually on the fret. Scipio was the messenger, for he was still about the person of that young nobleman, though I had relinquished my post on his marriage. Sometimes we heard of changes in the inferior departments of office, solely for the purpose of wreaking vengeance on his creatures, and filling up the vacancies with his enemies. Then Don Luis de Haro was represented as advancing in favour, and likely to be made prime minister. But the most mortifying circumstance of all was the change in the viceroyalty of Naples, which was taken from his friend, the Duke de Medina de las Torres, and bestowed on the High Admiral of Castile, who was his bitterest enemy. For this there was no other motive but the pleasure of giving pain to a fallen favourite. For the first 3 months, his lordship gave himself up in his solitude a prey to disappointment and regret, but his confessor, a holy and pious Dominican, supporting his religious zeal with manly eloquence, succeeded in pouring the balm of consolation into his soul. By continually representing to him, with apostolic energy, that his eternal salvation was now the only object worth his care, he weaned him gradually from the uses of this world. His Excellency was no longer panting for news from Madrid, but learning a new and important lesson, how to die. Madame d'Oliveras too, making a virtue of necessity, sought refuge for herself in the maternal guardianship of her convent, where Providence had reared up, for her edification in faith and good works, a sisterhood of holy maidens, whose spiritual discourses fed her soul, as if with manna in the wilderness. My master's peace within his own bosom advanced, as he withdrew more backward from sublunary things. The employment of his day was thus laid out. Almost the whole morning was devoted to religious duties till dinner time, and after dinner, for about 2 hours, he played at different games with me and some of his confidential domestics. He then generally retired alone into his closet till sunset, when he walked round his garden, or rode out into the neighbourhood either with his confessor or me. One day when I was alone with him, and was particularly struck with his apparent self-complacency, I took the liberty of congratulating his lordship on his complete reconciliation to retirement. Use, however late acquired, is second nature, answered he, for though I have all my life been accustomed to the bustle of business, I assure you that I become every day more and more attached to this calm and peaceful mode of life. Chapter 11. A change in his lordship for the worse. The marvellous cause, and melancholy consequences, of his dejection. His Excellency sometimes amused himself with gardening, by way of variety. One day, as I was watching his progress, he said, jokingly, "You see, Santillane, a fallen minister can turn gardener at last." "Nature will prevail, my lord," answered I. "You plant and water something useful at Loches, while Dionysius of Syracuse whipped schoolboys at Corinth." My master was not displeased either with the comparison or the compliment. We were all delighted at the castle to see our protector, rising above the cloud of adversity, take pleasure in so novel a mode of life, but we soon perceived an alarming change. He became gloomy, thoughtful, and melancholy. Our parties at play were all given up, and no efforts could succeed to divert his mind. From dinner time till evening he never left his closet. We thought the dreams of vanished greatness had returned to break his rest, and in this opinion the reverend Dominican gave the rein to his eloquence, but it could not outstrip the course of that hypochondriac malady, which triumphed over all opposition. It seemed to me there was some deeper cause, which it behooved a sincere friend to fathom. Taking advantage of our being alone together, "My lord," said I, in a tone of mingled respect and affection, "whence is it that you are no longer so cheerful as heretofore? Has your philosophy lost ground? Or has the world recovered its allurements? Surely you would not plunge again into that gulf where your virtue must inevitably be shipwrecked." "No, heaven be praised," replied the minister, "my part at court has long faded from my memory, and its trappings from my eyes." "Indeed? Why, then," resumed I, "since you have strength enough to banish false regrets, are you so weak as to indulge a melancholy which alarms us all? What is the matter with you, my dear master?" continued I, falling at his knees. "Some secret sorrow preys upon you, can you hide it from Santillane, whose zeal, discretion, and fidelity you have so often experienced? Why am I so unhappy as to have lost your confidence?" "You still possess it," said his lordship, "but I must own, it is reluctantly that I shall reveal the subject of my distress, yet the importunities of such a friend are irresistible. To no one else could I impart so singular a confidence. Yes, I am the prey of a morbid melancholy which eats inwardly into my vitals, a spectre haunts me every moment, arrayed in the most terrific form of preternatural horror. In vain have I argued with myself that it is a vision of the brain, an unreal mockery, its continual presentments blast my sight, and unseat my reason. Though my understanding teaches me, that in looking on this spectre I stare at vacancy, my spirits are too weak to derive comfort from the conviction. Thus much have you extorted from me, now judge whether the cause of my melancholy is fit to be divulged." With equal grief and astonishment did I listen to the strange confession, which implied a total derangement of the nervous system. "This, my lord," said I, "must proceed from injudicious abstinence." "So I thought at first," answered he, "and to try the experiment, I have been eating more than usual for some days past, but it is all to no purpose, the phantom takes his stand as usual." "It will vanish," said I, "if your excellency will only divert your mind by your accustomed relaxations with your household. Company and gentle occupation are the best remedies for these affections of the spirits." In a short time after this conversation, his lordship became seriously indisposed, and sent for 2 notaries from Madrid, to make his will. 3 capital physicians followed in their track, who had the reputation of curing their patients now and then. As soon as it was noised about the castle that these last undertakers were arrived, the case was given up for lost, weeping and gnashing of teeth took place universally, and the family mourning was ordered. They brought with them their usual understrappers, an apothecary, and a surgeon. The notaries were suffered to earn their fee first, after which, death's notaries prepared to take a bond of the patient. They practiced in the school of Sangrado, and from their very first consultation, ordered bleeding so frequently and freely, that in 6 days they brought his lordship to the point of death, and on the 7th delivered him from the terror of his sprite. Behind him sneaks another mortal, not unlike himself. Of jargon full, with terms obscure o'ercharged. Apothecary called, whose fetid hands, with power mechanic, and with charms arcane, Apollo, god of medicine, has endued. Bramston. After the minister's decease, a lively and sincere sorrow reigned in the castle of Loches. The whole household wept bitterly. Far from deriving consolation from the certainty of being remembered in his will, there was not a dependent who would not willingly have saved his life by the sacrifice of the legacy. As for me, whom he most delighted in, attached to him as I was from disinterested friendship, my grief was more acute than that of the rest. I question whether Antonia cost me more tears. Chapter 12. The proceedings at the castle of Loches after his lordship's death, and the course which Santillane adopted. The minister, according to his last injunctions, was buried without pomp and without procession in the convent, with the dirge of our lamentations. After the funeral, Madame de Oliveras called us together to hear the will read, with which the household had good reason to be satisfied. Everyone had a legacy proportioned to his claim, and none less than 2,000 crowns, mine was the largest, amounting to 10,000 pistoles, as a mark of his singular regard. The hospitals were not forgotten, and provision was made for an annual commemoration in several convents. Madame de Oliveras sent all the household to Madrid to receive their legacies from Don Raymond Caporis, who had orders to pay them, but I could not be of the party, in consequence of a violent fever from distress of mind, which confined me to the castle for more than a week. During that time, the Reverend Dominican paid me all possible attention. He had conceived a friendship for me, which was not confined to my worldly interests, and was anxious to know how I meant to dispose of myself on my recovery. I answered that I had not yet made up my mind upon the subject. There were moments when my feelings strongly prompted towards a religious vow. Precious moments! Exclaimed the Dominican, you will do well to profit by them. I advise you as a friend to retire to our convent at Madrid, for example, there to become a pious benefactor by the free gift of your whole fortune, and to die in the livery of St. Dominic. Many very questionable Christians have made amends for a life of sin by so holy an end. In the actual disposition of my mind, this advice was not unpalatable, and I promised to reflect upon it. But on consulting Scipio, who came to see me immediately after the monk, he treated the very notion as the phantom of a distempered brain. For shame! Said he, does not your estate at Lirias offer a more eligible seclusion? If you were delighted with it formerly, the charm will be increased tenfold, now that the lapse of years has moderated your sense of pleasure, and softened down your taste to the simple beauties of nature. It was no difficult matter to operate a change in my inclinations. My friend, said I, you carry it decidedly against the advocate of St. Dominic. We will go back to Lirias as soon as I am well enough to travel. This happened shortly, for as the fever subsided, I soon felt myself sufficiently strong to put my design in execution. We went first to Madrid. The sight of that city gave me far other sensations than heretofore. As I knew that almost its whole population held in horror the memory of a minister of whom I cherished the most affectionate remembrance, I could not feel at my ease within its precincts. My stay was therefore limited to 5 or 6 days, while Scipio was making the necessary arrangements for our rustication. In the meantime, I waited on Caporis, and received my legacy in ready money. I likewise made my arrangements with the receivers for the regular remittance of my pensions, and settled all my affairs in due order. The evening before our departure, I asked the son of Cosclina whether he had received his farewell from Don Henry. Yes, answered he, we took leave of each other this morning with mutual civility. He went so far as to express his regret that I should quit him, but however well satisfied he might be with me, I am by no means so with him. Mutual content is like a river, which must have its banks on either side. Besides, Don Henry makes but a pitiful figure at court now, he has fallen into utter contempt, people point at him with their finger in the streets, and call him a Genoese bastard. Judge, then, for yourself, whether it is consistent with my character to keep up the connection. We left Madrid one morning at sunrise, and went for Cuenca. The following was the order of our equipment, we 2 in a chaise and pair, 3 mules, laden with baggage and money, led by 2 grooms and 2 stout footmen, well armed. In the rear, the grooms wore sabres, and the postilion had a pair of pistols in his holsters. As we were 7 men in all, and 6 of us determined fellows, I took the road gaily, without trembling for my legacy. In the villages through which we passed our mules chimed their bells merrily, and the peasants ran to their doors to see us pass, supposing it to be at least the parade of some nobleman going to take possession of some viceroyalty. Chapter 13. The return of Gil Blas to his seat. His joy at finding his goddaughter Serafina marriageable, and his own second venture in the lottery of love. We were a fortnight on our journey to Lirias, having no occasion to make rapid stages. The sight of my own domain brought melancholy thoughts into my mind, with the image of my lost Antonia, but better topics of reflection came to my aid, with the full purpose to look at things on the brighter side, and the lapse of 22 years, which had gradually impaired the force of tender regret. As soon as I entered the castle, Beatrice and her daughter greeted me most cordially, while the family scene was interesting in the extreme. When their mutual transports were over, I looked earnestly at my goddaughter, saying, "Can this be the Serafina whom I left in her cradle? How tall and pretty! We must make a good match for her." "What? My dear godfather," cried my little girl, with an enchanting blush, "you have but just seen me, and do you want to get rid of me at once?" "No, my lovely child," replied I, "we hope not to lose you by marriage, but to find a husband for you in the neighborhood." "There is one ready to your hands," said Beatrice. "Serafina made a conquest one day at Mass. Her suitor has declared his passion, and asked my consent. I told him that his acceptance depended on her father and her godfather, and here you are to determine for yourselves." "What is the character of this village lordling?" said Scipio. "Is he not, like his fellows, the little tyrant of the soil, and insolent to those who have no pedigree to boast?" "The furthest from it in the world," answered Beatrice. "The young man is gentle in his temper and polished in his manners, handsome withal, and somewhat under 30. You paint him in flattering colors, said I to Beatrice. What is his name? Don Juan de Jutella, replied Scipio's wife. It is not long since he came to his inheritance. He lives on his own estate, about a mile off, with a younger sister, of whom he takes care. I once knew something of his family, observed I. It is one of the best in Valencia. I care less for lineage, cried Scipio, than for the qualities of the heart and mind. This Don Juan will exactly suit us, if he is a good sort of man. He is belied else, said Serafina, with a blushing interest in our conversation. The inhabitants of Lirias, who know him well, say all the good of him you can conceive. I smiled at this. And her father, not less quick-sighted, saw plainly that her heart had a share in the testimony of her tongue. The gentleman soon heard of our arrival, and paid his respects to us within 2 days. His address was pleasing and manly, so as to prepossess us in his favour. He affected merely to welcome us home as a neighbour. Our reception was such as not to discourage the repetition of his visit, but not a word of Serafina. When he was gone, Beatrice asked us how we liked him. We could have no objection to make, and gave it as our opinion that Serafina could not dispose of herself better. The next day, Scipio and I returned the visit. We took a guide, and luckily, for otherwise it might have puzzled us to find the place. It was not till our actual arrival that it was visible, for the mansion was situated at the foot of a mountain, in the middle of a wood, whose lofty trees hid it from our view. There was an antique and ruinous appearance about it, which spoke more for the descent than the wealth of its proprietor. On our entrance, however, the elegance of the interior arrangement made amends for the dilapidated grandeur of the outer walls. Don Juan received us in a handsome room, where he introduced his sister Dorothea, a lady between 19 and 20 years of age. She was a good deal tricked out, as if she had primed and loaded herself for conquest, in expectation of our visit. Thus presenting all her charms in full force, she did by me much as Antonia had done before, but I managed my raptures so discreetly, that even Scipio had no suspicion. Our conversation turned, as on the preceding day, on the mutual pleasure of good neighbourhood. Still he did not open on the subject of Serafina, nor did we attempt to draw him out. During our interview, I often cast a side glance at Dorothea, though with all the reserve of delicate apprehension. Whenever our eyes met, the citadel of my heart was ready to surrender. To describe the object of my love justly, as well as feelingly, her beauty was not of the most perfect kind, her skin was of a dazzling whiteness, and her lips united the colour with the fragrance of the rose. But her features were not so regular and well proportioned as might have been wished, yet, altogether, she won my heart. In short, I left the mansion of Jutella a different man from what I was on entering it, so that, returning to Lirias with my whole soul absorbed in Dorothea, I saw and spoke only of her. How is this, master? Said Scipio with a look of astonishment. You seem to be very much taken with Don Juan's sister. Can you be in love with her? Yes, my friend, answered I, to my shame be it spoken. Since the death of Antonia, how many lovely females have passed in review before me with indifference. And must my passions be irresistibly kindled at this time of life? Indeed, sir, replied the son of Cosclina, you may bless your stars, instead of squabbling with yourself. You are not so old as to make your sacrifice at the shrine of love a byword, and time has not yet ploughed such furrows on your brow as to render hopeless the desire of pleasing. When you see Don Juan next, ask him boldly for his sister, he cannot refuse her to you, and besides, if his views in her settlement are ambitious, how can he do better? You have a patent of nobility in your pocket, and upon that your posterity may ride easy. After 5 generations, when pedigree herself shall be lost in the confusion of her materials, it may exercise the diligence of learned inquiry to trace the family of the Santillanes to the beginning of its archives, and consecrate the fame of its founder by the indistinctness of his story. Chapter 14. A double marriage, and the conclusion of the history. By this discourse, Scipio encouraged me to declare myself, without considering how he exposed me to the danger of a refusal. My own resolution was taken with fear and trembling. Though I carried my years well, and might have sunk at least 10, it did not seem unlikely that a young beauty might turn up her nose at the disparity. I determined, however, to bolt the question the first time I saw her brother, who was not without his trepidations on the subject of my goddaughter. He returned my call the next morning, just as I had done dressing. Signor de Santillane, said he, I wish to speak with you on some serious business. I took him into my closet, where entering on the subject at once, I imagine, continued he, that you are not unacquainted with the purpose of my visit. I love Serafina, you are all in all with her father, I must request you therefore to intercede and procure for me the accomplishment of my heart's desire, then shall I have to thank you for the prime bliss of my existence. Signor Don Juan, answered I, as you come to the point at once, you can have no objection to my following your example, my good offices are fully at your service, and I shall hope for yours with your sister in return. Don Juan was agreeably surprised. Can it be possible, exclaimed he, that Dorothea should have made a conquest of your heart since yesterday? It is even so, said I, and it would make me the happiest of men if the proposal should meet with your joint approbation. You may rely on that, replied he, though with some pretensions to family pride. Yours is not an alliance to be despised. You flatter me highly, rejoined I, that you are not mealy-mouthed about receiving a commoner into your pedigree is a mark of good sense, but even if nobility had been a necessary ingredient in your sister's requisites for a husband, we should not have quarrelled on that account. I have worked out 20 years in the trammels of office, and the king, as a reward of my long labours, has granted me a patent of nobility. This high-minded gentleman read my credentials over with extreme satisfaction, and returning them, told me that Dorothea was mine. And Serafina yours, exclaimed I. Thus were the two marriages agreed on between us. The consent of the intended brides was all that remained, for we neither of us presumed to control the inclinations of our wards. My friend therefore carried home my proposal to his sister, and I called Scipio, Beatrice, and my goddaughter together, for the purpose of laying open a similar project. Beatrice voted loudly for immediate acceptance, and Serafina silently. The father did not say much against it, but boggled a little at the fortune he must give to a gentleman whose seat required such immediate and extensive repairs. I stopped Scipio's mouth by telling him that was my concern, and that I should contribute 4,000 pistoles to the architect's estimate. In the evening, Don Juan came again. Your business is going swimmingly, said I, pray heaven mine may promise as fairly. Better it cannot, answered he, my influence was quite unnecessary to prevail with Dorothea, your person had made its impression, and your manners pleased her. You were afraid she might not like you, while she, with more reason, having nothing to offer you but her heart and hand, what would she offer more? Interrupted I, out of my wits with joy. Since the lovely Dorothea can think of me without repugnance, I ask no more, my fortune is ample, and the possession of her is the only dowry I should value. Don Juan and myself, highly delighted at having brought our views to bear so soon, were for hastening our nuptials, and cutting off all superfluous ceremonies. I closeted the gentleman with Serafina's parents, the settlements were soon agreed on, and he took his leave, promising to return next day with Dorothea. My eager desire of appearing agreeable in that lady's eyes occasioned me to spend 3 hours at least in adjusting my dress, and communicating the air of a lover to my person, but I could not do it so much to my mind as in my younger days. The preparations for courtship are a pleasure to a young man, but a serious business and hazardous speculation to one who is beginning to be oldish. And yet it turned out better than my hopes or deserts, for Don Juan's sister received me so graciously as to put me in good humour with myself. I was charmed with the turn of her mind, and foreboded that, with discreet management and much deference, I might really get her to like me as well as anybody else. Full of this sweet hope, I sent for the lawyers to draw up the 2 contracts, and for the clergyman of Paterna to bring us better acquainted with our mistresses. Thus did I light the torch of Hymen for the 2nd time, and it did not burn blue with the brimstone of repentance. Dorothea, like a virtuous wife, made a pleasure of her duty. In gratitude for the pains I took to anticipate all her wishes, she soon loved me as well as if I had been younger. Don Juan and my goddaughter were most enthusiastic in their mutual ardor, and what was most unprecedented of all, the 2 sisters-in-law loved one another sincerely. Don Juan was a man in whom all good qualities met, my esteem for him increased daily, and he did not repay it with ingratitude. In short, we were a happy and united family, we could scarcely bear the interval of separation between evening and morning. Our time was divided between Lirias and Jutella, His Excellency's pistols made the old battlements to raise their heads again, and the castle to resume its lordly port. For these 3 years, reader, I have led a life of unmixed bliss in this beloved society. To perfect my satisfaction, Heaven has deigned to send me 2 smiling babes, whose education will be the amusement of my declining years, and if ever husband might venture to hazard so bold an hypothesis, I devoutly believe myself their father. The End.